There exists a form of self-mastery so profound that it transforms not just what you do, but who you are down to the cellular level. Today, you will discover the ancient Shinobi system that created warriors whose discipline was so unshakable that their very presence commanded respect, even through silence alone. Have you ever encountered someone whose inner stillness was so complete that it made your own mental chaos unbearable? While everyone else argues with their impulses, negotiates with their cravings, and breaks promises to themselves by Thursday, this person moves through life with the precision of flowing water over stone. And when people witness this level of self-command, they whisper the same thing. That's not human. That's not possible for someone like me. But there was a brotherhood in feudal Japan whose members developed something that made even samurai warriors appear ordinary by comparison. They called themselves Shinobi, and their mastery wasn't built on strength or speed. It was constructed through a mental architecture so complete that failure became almost impossible to conceive. Before his death, the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi wrote that the greatest enemy is not the opponent before you, but the mind that hesitates, doubts, and negotiates with itself. The Shinobi understood this truth so deeply that they created a system to eliminate the very capacity for internal argument. But here's what separates their method from everything you've tried before. This isn't about willpower, motivation, or pushing through resistance. This system works by reconstructing your identity at such a fundamental level that the old patterns of weakness simply cannot exist within your new neural architecture. Before I reveal exactly how this transformation occurs, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below with the one pattern of self-betrayal you most want to eliminate from your life. This interaction helps the content reach others who need this ancient wisdom, and it shows me you're genuinely committed to internal reconstruction. The story I'm about to share began with a software engineer named David, 34 years old, successful by every external measure, but internally at war with himself every single day. David possessed something that made his suffering particularly acute. He was intelligent enough to see exactly what he needed to do, but psychologically incapable of sustaining it. Monday arrived with crystalline clarity. Meditation at 5:30, workout at 6, healthy breakfast, focused work blocks, early sleep. By Wednesday, the internal negotiations would begin. Just skip today. You're tired. You can start again tomorrow. By Friday, complete surrender to the old patterns. Weekend promises about the following week. The cycle was as predictable as sunrise. David tried everything the modern world offered: habit tracking applications, accountability partners, reward systems, punishment protocols. Nothing created lasting change because he was fighting something he couldn't see: the very architecture of his own mind. His brain had learned to categorize every commitment as optional, every promise as negotiable, every standard as flexible. What David didn't understand was that his nervous system had been conditioned by a culture that treats discipline as temporary effort rather than permanent identity. Every time he broke a promise to himself, his subconscious mind gathered evidence that he was someone who starts strong but cannot sustain. This became his core identity, not someone who occasionally fails, but someone whose fundamental nature is inconsistency. Then David discovered something that changed everything. Not a technique or strategy, but a complete philosophical framework that had produced the most disciplined warriors in human history. The Shinobi understood something about human psychology that modern science has only recently begun to validate. Your behavior flows from identity, not intention. In the mountain monasteries of ancient Japan, there existed a principle so powerful that it could transform a peasant into a warrior whose mind knew no hesitation. They called it seishin, the cultivation of right mind. But this wasn't about positive thinking or mental toughness. This was about something far more profound: the complete elimination of inner fragmentation. The Shinobi discovered that human suffering comes from one source: the gap between who you are and who you act as. When these two aspects of self are in conflict, every decision becomes a battle. When they are unified, action flows like water finding its natural course. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what these ancient warriors knew intuitively. The brain possesses something called the default mode network, a collection of neural pathways that activate when we're not focused on specific tasks. This network is where our sense of self resides, where we tell ourselves stories about who we are and what we're capable of. The Shinobi understood that if you change the stories running in this default network, you change everything. They didn't try to override their impulses with willpower. They restructured their identity so completely that the old impulses simply had nowhere to attach, no soil left to root in. David learned this the hard way. His first attempt at implementing Shinobi principles lasted exactly 11 days. On the 12th morning, his alarm rang at 5:30, and his mind immediately began its familiar routine. "You're exhausted. This is too extreme. One day won't matter." The old neural pathways were still intact, still broadcasting the same identity story. Someone who tries hard, but ultimately collapses back into familiarity. But then David encountered the first Shinobi principle that would begin his true transformation. The principle of Shinobu, which means to endure, but not in the way most people understand endurance. This wasn't about gritting your teeth through discomfort. This was about becoming someone for whom discomfort simply does not register as a valid argument to stop. The ancient masters taught that there are two types of people in this world: those who negotiate with their commitments and those who do not. The first group lives in constant internal conflict. The second group experiences something most humans never taste: the peace of having no alternatives. Even with this knowledge, David found himself waging war every single morning. His body wanted sleep when the alarm rang. His mind wanted ease when discipline was required. His emotions wanted comfort when growth demanded discomfort. This internal resistance wasn't a character flaw. It was exactly what every shinobi faced during their transformation. The difference was in how they interpreted this resistance. Where most people see internal conflict as a sign they should quit or soften their approach, the shinobi recognized it as evidence that real change was beginning. Identity does not die quietly. It fights for its life. David's breakthrough came when he stopped trying to win the internal argument and instead removed the argument entirely. He discovered the shinobi principle of non-negotiable hours. Every day, we waste precious mental energy on the same pointless question: when will I practice? Now or later? Morning or evening? This decision burns glucose in your prefrontal cortex that should be reserved for execution, not debate. The ancient warriors chose their hours not because they were optimal, but because they were fixed, unchanging, beyond discussion. David selected 5:30 in the morning, not because he loved early rising, but because the world was asleep. No emails, no noise, no excuses. The first week was psychological torture. His body rebelled against the sudden disruption. His mind produced elegant and convincing reasons to stop. This is unhealthy. This is unnecessary. This is too extreme. But something remarkable happened on day 8. He woke up 2 minutes before his alarm. His nervous system had begun preparing for what it now recognized as inevitable. By the 14th day, his feet hit the ground before his conscious mind even engaged. No thought, no negotiation, just movement. This is what the shinobi called automatic action, behavior flowing not from decision, but from identity. But David discovered that fixing his schedule had only solved half the equation. His mind found a new battlefield. Instead of negotiating when to practice, it began negotiating what to practice. Meditation some days, training others, reading when convenient. This inconsistency was sabotaging his transformation in ways he couldn't yet see. Every micro-decision became a doorway for the old identity to slip back in. The shinobi understood something crucial about human psychology. Variety isn't what keeps you engaged. Variety is where consistency quietly dies. The ancient masters taught their students something that sounds almost robotic to modern ears, but contains profound truth about how the mind forms identity. Perfect practice requires perfect repetition. Not because repetition is inherently valuable, but because repetition eliminates the decision fatigue that kills transformation. David implemented what the Shinobi called the single form practice. 20 push-ups, 10 minutes of breathing meditation, 10 minutes of reading. Same sequence, same duration, same intensity, every single day. His friends called him obsessive. His family worried he was becoming rigid. They didn't understand that rigidity was the mechanism, not the mistake. When you eliminate variables, your brain stops wasting energy on micro-decisions and channels that power into execution. When you do the same thing at the same time in the same way, your nervous system begins to automate the entire sequence. This isn't about becoming a robot. This is about freeing your consciousness for higher purposes by making discipline effortless and unconscious. The third week brought the fiercest internal resistance David had ever experienced. His mind screamed for novelty, variation, change. This is boring. You're not evolving. Mix things up before you burn out. But David had learned something from the old texts. That voice was not a guide. It was the echo of his previous identity, fighting for survival. A Harvard neuroscientist who has studied habit formation for 2 decades explains what was happening inside David's brain. When you repeat an action in the same context for approximately 66 days, the basal ganglia take over. The behavior becomes automatic, as natural as breathing. You're no longer deciding to do it. You are simply being someone who does it. Week 4 arrived with a shift so subtle he barely noticed. The voice of negotiation grew quiet. Week 6 delivered something extraordinary. He was halfway through his practice before realizing he had begun. The sequence was running itself. This is what people misunderstand about true discipline. It's not about endless willpower. It's about repeating a process until willpower is no longer required. Your nervous system learns the pattern like a dancer learns choreography, fluid, precise, inevitable. But David's real test was still approaching. The moment when real life would attempt to shatter everything he had built. On day 37, David faced the test that destroys most transformations. His daughter fell ill with fever. His wife needed him present. Work demanded overtime. The perfect storm arrived exactly when his new identity was still fragile, still forming. This is where the ancient principle of Renshu enters. Continuous practice without interruption. The Shinobi understood something about momentum that modern psychology has only recently confirmed. A river never stops flowing. During drought, it may become a trickle, but movement is life. The moment the water stops, it is no longer a river, just the memory of where water once moved. Your practice follows the same law. The moment you create a gap, you're no longer practicing. You become someone who used to practice. David's old pattern would have returned instantly. Sick child equals emergency mode. Emergency mode equals suspension of all personal commitments. Suspension equals gradual slide back into old identity. But David had learned something from the warrior texts that separated initiates from the transformed. The Shinobi practiced ketsudan, the cutting of alternatives. When you eliminate the possibility of stopping, stopping becomes nearly impossible to imagine. Not through force, but through the rewiring of who you are. That morning, while his wife tended to their daughter, David performed his sequence in the garage. 20 push-ups between the car and lawnmower. 10 minutes of breathing practice sitting on a cold paint bucket. 10 minutes of reading under the light of his phone. Nothing was ideal. Everything maintained momentum toward the identity he declared 40 days earlier. This is what separates those who transform from those who merely try. Understanding that practice doesn't need perfect conditions, just continuity. A Stanford researcher who has studied elite performers for 15 years discovered something astonishing. Champions are not the ones who train hardest. They are the ones who continue when everyone else stops. The Shinobi had a saying, "Iron worked daily stays sharp. Iron that rests grows dull." Your nervous system behaves the same. Daily activation keeps the neural pathway alive. Even a single day of rest becomes the doorway through which old patterns return. Week 6 delivered David's second crisis. Business travel, early flights, crowded airports, hotel rooms too small to stretch in. His colleagues found him doing push-ups in the airport bathroom. They laughed, called him intense, obsessive, perfect. When your discipline makes others uncomfortable, you're operating at the level most people never reach. The ancient masters taught that there are only two reactions to unwavering commitment: respect or discomfort. Those who possess discipline recognize it instantly. Those who lack it feel threatened simply by its existence. Your consistency becomes a mirror, reflecting their inconsistency back at them. But David's transformation revealed something modern productivity methods rarely address. The obstacles you can plan for almost never break you. It's the unexpected emergency, the storm you didn't see coming, the thing without a plan that shatters months of progress. Your child wakes sick at 5 in the morning. Your car dies on the way to the gym. Your boss calls for an all-night deadline. These are habit destroyers, not because they're big, but because you have no predetermined response. When chaos arrives, the brain defaults to the path of least resistance, not because you're weak, but because you're deciding under stress instead of executing a decision already made. The Shinobi were different. They trained in yosoku, the art of foresight, not prediction, preparation, not guessing what life will do, creating answers before the question arrives. When the meditation hall flooded, training moved to the courtyard. When illness hit, intensity lowered, but practice continued. When war erupted, routines adapted, but never vanished. David adopted what the old texts called kete-zumi, decisions made in advance. He wrote every obstacle that had broken him in the past and designed the exact counter-response for each. Sick child, silent practice in the basement, travel, bodyweight training in the hotel, exhaustion, half-sequence minimum, but never zero. Each scenario received its automatic answer. When X happens, I do Y. No thinking, no negotiating, just execution. The power of this isn't only consistency, it is the removal of decision fatigue. Your nervous system relaxes because it already knows. No matter what tomorrow brings, the identity remains intact. A Yale behavioral scientist who studies decision-making under stress found the same truth. When actions are pre-decided, the prefrontal cortex stays online for performance, not debate. Day 55 delivered David's ultimate trial. A family emergency forced him to drive through the night. He walked into his house at 4 in the morning, exhausted, raw, depleted. The old David would have skipped the entire week. The new David? He already had the rule for this moment. 3 push-ups, 1 minute of breathing, 1 page of scripture or study, the smallest version of the ritual, but still the ritual. Not because it built strength, not because it burned calories, but because it protected identity. He stayed the man he had been becoming. This is what the Shinobi understood about transformation. You're not preserving a habit. You're preserving who you are. And once identity solidifies, it defends itself. 90 days after beginning his journey, David stood before his bathroom mirror at 5:29 a.m. But he was no longer David. The man looking back possessed something that cannot be borrowed, faked, or spoken into existence. He held the quiet authority of someone who had eliminated every gap between intention and action. His colleagues noticed first, not through words, but through presence. He moved through meetings without the nervous flutter that once ran his life. His calm became unsettling to those who still lived in internal negotiation. When others complained about being tired, being busy, being unmotivated, David simply continued, like water flowing around stone. The Shinobi system had accomplished what no modern method could. It dissolved the old identity so completely that the new one operated without conscious effort. He no longer chose to practice. He was practice. He no longer decided to be disciplined. Discipline had become his nature. And now, your transformation waits at the same threshold. Will you negotiate with your commitments like everyone else? Or will you join the rare circle of those who have removed alternatives entirely? The ancient warriors proved something modern people forget. Identity is not inherited. It is built, layer by layer, choice by choice, day after day. The path is simple, not easy. Choose your non-negotiable hour. Eliminate every variable. Predetermine every response. Practice without gaps until practice becomes you. When people begin to whisper that your consistency isn't normal, you will know you have reached where the Shinobi intended. The question left is not whether this system works. It is whether you possess the patience to let it remake you fully. So I ask you now, what identity will you publicly declare today? Now it's your turn to step onto the path. In the comments below, declare the identity you choose to embody from this day forward. Not a goal, not a plan, an identity. Who do you become when hesitation ends? Write it, seal it, and let this be the first step of your own unbreakable self.